Hi, and welcome to ColorPlaza TV. In this episode, we'll be taking a look at two large format printers from Canon and HP. And we'll be looking at the 12 color model from both and 24-inch both. So the models that we're looking at is the Canon ipf6450 versus the HP Z3200PS 24-inch. I'm not going to show you lots of images on those printers because you can find lots of images on the web already. I'm trying to show you some stuff that you cannot easily find on the web yet on those printers. So in order to show you stuff, I have my display that I can share with you. And pre-recorded, I have here a video that we'll start off with. Now, before I start the video, let me explain what we'll do in this video. We'll be looking at different aspects of printers. One of the key aspects is, of course, speed. We'll start with that. Another is, of course, color and quality, because we're looking at quality photo printers here. Then, of course, not unimportant is how easy it is to use and costs. So we'll try to cover all of these. And let's start with the speed. What I did is I made a test where I used a driver and exactly the same test file and printed out exactly the same file on exactly the same system one by one and took a recording. And I edited those two recordings side by side, and now we can have a look at how the speed is. And this, well, I've started first. So this is the point where the driver has actually been started. So I sent the file to the driver on pause and I depaused it at 0. It always takes a few seconds before a printer fires up. It needs to wake up. So it's preparing to print after about 12 seconds to Canon. So it means it wakes up because it's receiving data it can process and print. After 23 seconds, the same thing happens with the HP. So about the same time it takes the file to transfer to the HP, the Canon's about to start printing, which is good. Now this test has been done on a paper matte, and that's important to know because the speeds you can obtain are different using different papers. So the speed you see for the Canon on the left is actually the highest speed at which it can print, but it's also true for the HP printer on the right. As you can see, the Canon is quite dramatically faster because it has now finished the first print at 1 minute and 6 seconds. This is, by the way, a quarter of a square meter. The actual print I have here, this is the print we're talking about, and this is if you take 4 of these, it's a square meter. So what I did, I sent 4 of these in a queue to see not just the speed of one single print, but also the speed if you do multiple prints. So the speed you can obviously see is different. The HP takes a bit longer to start, it takes a bit longer to prepare its print heads. That's not a major issue. The major difference is the speed itself. And what causes that difference? Because it's interesting to know. Well, the main difference is the way the print head is used. If we look at the print heads, I've got a print head here of both. So this is a print head, and this is the part it prints with, right here. This little area here is about slightly less than an inch, and it has the 1200 nozzles in a row for all colors. And HP uses a system where you have 6 of these print heads, so you have 12 colors. Canon uses a different type of print head, and it appears to have 2 heads here, but actually those are 6 colors in total. So again, 1200 dots per inch, and for 6 colors. So to get 12 colors, you have 2 of these heads. And if we put them side by side, you can see, even on the video, that the Canon head is slightly wider. So that's a plus to start with, because the printhead moves like this across the paper, and then the paper feeds up a little bit and the printhead moves again sideways. So why is the speed so different? Well, let me first put this one back. the speed is so much different because the way print passes are being used by the different brands. So print pass is one pass of the print head, and then how much the paper transports to do the next pass. If you do single pass printing, you print a line, move the paper the exact width of the head, and print the next line bidirectional. That's the fastest way to print, and both printers can do that on line drawings pretty accurately, and you get a pretty decent print. However, if you go to a graphic quality where you have color fills, photographic prints, stuff like that, the amount of ink that needs to be put on is too great to be consistent if you do bidirectional at the one pass mode. So they all use more than one pass. So the Canon is capable of doing a two-pass print. So it goes back and forth and then moves the entire paper up one print head width, so almost an inch. The HP, even in its fastest mode on any graphic paper, uses much more passes, and I think it's 8. So it moves only 1/8 of the print head in distance, instead of the entire head moving the entire head distance. So that makes it a lot faster for the Canon. And the smart thing they did with Canon is that they've somehow been able to go back and forth and print two pass without showing a difference at the next pass. Because if you do single pass printing or double pass printing on the HP, you get sort of a horizontal banding at the print head width, which doesn't look very good. You won't see that here because that only happens on technical printers at lowest speed. So we're 5 minutes into the video and the Canon is finished. And the HP has done one print and a half. So it's quite dramatic, the difference in speed. It's more than twice as fast. And of course that may not be vital to you. I mean, if you use it to make a couple hundred prints a year, you won't be worried too much about if it takes 5 minutes or 10 minutes for you to make your print. If you ever do production for others and have to do production runs, then it could be very important that you can match the speed that you need from your printer, and it's always nice to have a higher speed in your printer, obviously. So, well, we could wait this entire video. Let's just cut the second one. So that's after 6 minutes. So you can do the math. It's 3 minutes, 6 minutes. So we're going to end up somewhere around at 11, 12 minutes at the end. I can fast forward this video. Now let's scroll it forward. Go to the next print, 7 minutes. You see the next print coming. At 9 minutes something it's printed, 9:14. And the final one is printed, and there it is, and it comes out, whoops, let me start it there again, at 12 minutes 23. So if you do the math in how many square meters it actually does, so not the specifications the manufacturers put on the data sheets, because those are usually nonsense. If you do the actual speed, the highest speed you can get on a matte paper, it's different on a photo paper, on a matte paper, you can get 5 prints per hour, because 12 minutes is 1 square meter, so 5 square meters an hour on the HP, where you can get 12 square meters per hour on the Canon, so that is a significant difference. Final thing, you see here that the video is still running. And that's because the HP printer is still doing lots of stuff. It's checking its print heads. It takes almost 2 minutes after printing before it's actually completely silent again. Speaking of silence, both of them are not very silent. I haven't put the recording sound up very high, but you don't want to be right next to either of these printers when they're printing and doing your work. So you want to have them slightly off to the side somewhere. Or just have to bear with a lot of noise. Canon makes a lot of noise when it starts up its fans. It's very quiet when it doesn't print. The HP has a consistent fan and makes slightly less noise during the initial start of the print, but still an annoying noise. So now they're both ready. So that's the video. So that's speed. Speed, of course, is not the only thing in a printer. There's much more to a printer than fast printing. Before I go to quality, the speed difference in photographic paper, so semi-gloss or high gloss paper, the difference percentage-wise is similar. The actual printing time will go up 2, 4, 6, 8 times. If you do the maximum quality setting on both, which has the most number of print passes, they are both of them at least 8 times slower than what you saw here. So then they become really slow. The differences become slightly less because the higher passes you get, then the print head width is less relevant because you only move a real small portion of the print head anyway. So let's look at the details now. So besides, let's look at color first. I have this little tool called ColorThink Pro. So let me get it up here. And I've already loaded up some files here. So what you see here are some charts on color range. So what you're looking at is a two-dimensional representation of the color range of my monitor. So I'm starting off with my monitor first. I'll explain why a little bit later. My monitor in relationship to sRGB is like this. So my monitor displays sRGB perfectly. If I look at Adobe RGB, that's a bit bigger than my monitor is. And that is actually true for almost all monitors. In fact, it is always true that your profile, your Adobe RGB profile, can never be obtained 100% by any monitor. But that's got more to do with the black level that the Adobe RGB and sRGB model have. They can produce a black, they can have a black that your monitor will never have because it's almost an infinite black. Well, it is an infinite black, it's illumination 0. But that's a little sidestep there. So I tend to use sRGB in most of my printing because why would I want to print colors that I cannot see in my screen, on my screen before I print them? It is obviously true that Adobe RGB has a greater color range, and the printers we're looking at both have a bigger color range than sRGB as well. But if you want to stay safe within what you can see, and it's always nice to be able to see what you're going to get before you actually print it or have it printed somewhere else, it's smarter to stick it to sRGB. In the end production, you might want to use Adobe RGB when you're still manipulating the file. And then when you save it out as sRGB. Because sRGB has been produced to be a average of all displays out there. So that means if you send your photo out to a customer that looks at their display, they're likely to see the same thing. Whereas if you use Adobe RGB and have a really high-end monitor from ISO or whatever, and you can see almost Adobe RGB, and you send it out to a customer that has a normal screen, they won't be able to see the colors. This is even more true if you go to print. This little profile in the center is a generic CMYK profile that you will find in Photoshop. So if you convert to CMYK generic, that's what you'll end up with. So that's just a small version of sRGB. It's not terrible, but it is definitely less than both S and Adobe RGB. So not to confuse you, we're going to switch off generic and my profile, my display. Now at the bottom here I have the Canon and the HP. And I've done the Canon in red and the HP in blue, well, cyan because blue is a bit too dark, to represent their brand color. So you can see that their color range are virtually identical. The Canon has a small plus in the y-axis, in the a-axis, so in the Y color, yellow color, and in the really peaks of the color there's differences. So the green is slightly more green and the blue is slightly more blue. You won't notice that in any normal image very quickly, because those are really colors way off the map. You will notice it if you start to do proofing with a printer. So if your intention is to do proofing, color range is good. If you want to do proofing for Pantone colors, it's a different topic. If you're really interested in color management, look at my color management videos. So the color range of these two are identical. To suit, this is two-dimensional, so we're looking at the top of an LAB view. If I go to a three-dimensional view and switch off my monitor, so it'll just be blocking. So go to three-dimensional. You can see that the L, the A, and the B axis. The L is the one that's vertical, and the A, that's coming around now, and the B you can see at the other end. So you can see that if I switch off my sRGB, they are very similar in shape and in size. It's not a huge difference. Will you notice this in a print? I don't think so. In most prints you won't. On the test print that I've shown you on the video, I can look at both of them and I have to look at the back to see which paper is which, because I cannot tell from the print itself. So they are quite similar. So for color range you can choose either, with a slight edge for Canon. So that's on quality, or color range quality. Let me hide this one. Now of course there's another thing, and that's the actual sharpness of the print. So let's have a look at an image that I put up here in Photoshop. Now what you see here is the same test image that I've used, and if you see those little ugly things here, those are details from this image. So her actual left eye here, if I zoom in I can show you. These little two dots are the dots we're looking at when we're looking at these. So these two dots are her left eye, and these two, and these two, and these two. So the HP is the one at the top, and Canon is at the bottom. And an interesting little thing came up, and I've always known that high quality settings do not always produce a completely better print, although you'd expect it. So what I've done, I've printed this image at a small size, just an A4 size, a letter size, and I've taken a microscope and put it on the eye and took a close-up image of the actual output there. And I've done that both in fast and in best mode of those printers. So taking its highest speed, which still gives a good quality, and the best possible, so the highest number of passes. So where the printhead moves the smallest amount of space, or the paper moves the smallest amount of space before the next pass of the printhead. So it makes like 16 or 32 steps before it passes the entire printhead. So it makes it tediously slow. And as you can see, it does not make it sharper. On the HP, there's not a lot of difference between fast and best. Both are pretty good. I mean, this is not completely round anymore. This is slightly different, but not completely round either. On the Canon, you see something different. You see the fast mode is better probably than the HP, because it's nice and round, and those sparkly sparkles in the eye will be round. And they are perfectly, well, almost perfectly round here. They're not at all round anymore if you go to best mode. So you'd expect it to print better in best mode, but it actually prints less good in best mode than it does in fast mode when it comes to preserving details. It will print more smooth colors, and it can have a slightly larger color range. Smoothness is just by having more passes you avoid banding, so you avoid stripes, which you might get in its fast mode sometimes, a little bit. Not on photo paper, but on matte if you go the entire highest speed that you saw on the test. On photo paper you always have more passes, so you never get the banding from the printhead itself, even in the fast mode, because they've taken down the speed and upped the number of passes. But it's interesting to see that in best mode it actually produces an image that is not as good as in fast mode. Why is that? Well, my theory is, and I think it's true, that the printhead uses 1200 nozzles per inch. And if you only print 1/32nd part of that printhead, you only used 1/32nd of those 1200 dots per inch. So most of those dots are idle, and they are waving because the printhead is moving at quite a rapid pace between the passes. So what it actually does, it dries up the printhead. So the ink at the nozzles where it's not printing, and most of those nozzles will not be printing in the highest number of passes, actually dries up a little bit, even at the edges only, but it still dries up. And instead of shooting at a straight line, the ink will sort of spray out a little bit more and can end up not exactly at the space where it needs to be, but slightly off or slightly more scattered. And that causes the perfectly round dots here for our eye to be much less than perfect round here. What you see here is another detail. So this is an interesting difference. This is the HP, this is the Canon. And here you can see that it's actually producing, this is actually this part. So that's this little, about this size. So you can see some yellow-red color there. And you can see that if I go to 100% view, this is the actual view of the pixels, it produces some pixels that are off, so they are misfired. And here we have less of that. You see some yellow dots here, so it's just to build up the color. You see that always, if you build up a color, they'll be evenly spaced, randomly spaced, some different colors. You will notice these now as yellow, but if you zoom out, you will never see they're yellow. You'll just see the color that's intended with all the mixes of the colors. So in general, you can say that these two printers produce a very sharp image. It cannot be much sharper than this. Well, it can be, but what would be the point? You will only be able to see this with a magnifying lens or a microscope. I could not tell this difference with my naked eye. Now I have glasses, even with my glasses on I cannot tell. I have to use my microscope to see those differences. So sharpness a problem on these? No, and it's logical because they're both 2400 by 1200. And the reason by the way why they are 1200 by 2400 is that the printhead has 1200 nozzles but moves along the print path, and in the printhead direction movement it can have a different resolution because that's just however you fire it, whenever you fire it. So if you wait a long time before you fire it, you have a low resolution. If you print, or if you fire up more, you can have a high resolution. So the highest resolution in both printers is 2400 in this direction where the printhead moves, and 1200 in the paper direction. Both are great resolutions. We do not need to go any higher. We probably will, but it's not necessary. Epson printers go higher, but there's a big difference. A little sidestep here. There's a big difference that the printhead that Epson uses does not have its actual resolution in its dots. So where you take these printheads from Canon and HP, these actually have the 1200 dots per inch. They have 1200 nozzles per color. Epson uses a printhead that has a gap in between those nozzles that is much greater than the print resolution. So in order to fill up those gaps, it needs to make multiple passes, which makes it slower by definition. So until the time that Epson comes up with a 1200 or 1440, if they want to stick to their 720 multiples, unless they come up with a printer that has that nozzle density, it will never be as fast as the Canon and the HP. It can be as fast, but it has to lower its resolution. What it actually does, it just fires out a larger drop. And if you fire out larger drops, you don't need to have them spaced at the highest resolution. So, little explanation on resolution there. So that's about details and quality. Now, not important is ease of use and price. So for that, let me take up my Excel. So here, of course, take up my Excel file. There's a price comparison here. There is a definite price difference in the machine. If we look at the price machine itself, this is an average street price here in the Netherlands. So the HP is around 3200, the Canon's about 2700. You probably will find deals that are slightly higher or lower, but I had to use an average, and you could debate about if these are accurate. You can fill in different numbers if you like. So there's a difference, but the offerings are slightly different. So let's talk about that for a little bit too, because what is the main difference between the 3200PS 24 and the Canon ipf6450 in regards to capability from a user standpoint? That's the PS. PS means that the HP machine has a PostScript interpreter built in. So for photography, doesn't mean anything. It's completely useless. You do not need PostScript for photo printing. But if you want to do something more than photo printing, so for instance, if your designs have photos and Pantone colors, and you want to do a proof, and you want to have a good representation of what a Pantone color will do, you will need PostScript, because Pantone can only be printed correctly if you use PostScript. And the Canon has that built in, so that's nice. Or the HP has that built in. The Canon does not have that built in. It needs software to do that. There is no hardware option. That's one of the differences. The other, maybe biggest difference is the built-in I1 spectrophotometer in the HP 3200. That enables the 3200 to create its own ICC profiles. It prints out a target. I should have taken one here, but I don't have one here. They're all downstairs. Prints out a target and then scans it and creates an ICC profile autonomously. So you just do one click, you give it a name, and half an hour later you have a profile. On a Canon, you can do that on only this model, on the 24-inch model, but it's an option. And it's an option that will cost you almost €1,000. So that would make the Canon printer more expensive. The ease of use of that system, I don't know. It's hard to beat the ease of use system of the HP for making profiles. But there is software available for free. So all you need is the option, the specific Canon option spectrophotometer, which is around slightly under €1,000. So why do you need a profile in the first case? Let's have a small talk about that. If a printer would not need a profile, because they would all be the same and stay consistent throughout their lives, we would not need profiles. Just the fact that we do have profiles means that machines will have variations in what they do, depending on the status of their printheads, the humidity, the temperature, and of course more different factors like media, type of media, humidity of the media itself, and stuff like that. So in order to have variations that are caused by these factors evened out, you need to create a profile, an ICC profile. And both of them can do calibrations. Both the Canon and the HP can print out their basic CMYK and other basic colors and have them scanned and see how well they behave, make a curve for each basic color. That is, however, not a profile. That is just the basis for a profile. Because in order to make a profile, you first do a linearization. And that's what you do with the Canon. It's also what you do with an HP. But then at Canon, it stops unless you have the €1,000 option. And with HP, you can also create a profile in one step. So that's a big difference. Another difference that I didn't talk about is the inks. And you'll see that in the price here as well. Now the HP has this size cartridge. They're 130 milliliters, which oddly is the same size as this, although it's considerably smaller. This is also 130 milliliters, and this is the standard cartridge that is supplied with your Canon ipf6450. But the Canon also has available the much larger 300 milliliter cartridges. So for each color you can have the 300 milliliter cartridge, which of course gives your printer a longer time that you can print. That makes for easier printing, because if you have 12 colors you're more likely to run out of ink at one point because you have more colors, then they all run out eventually. Both systems have ways of telling you that they're low, but of course if you have 300, the chances of running out of ink are much less. And a big difference, the Canon has a system where it has an ink buffer. So besides this cartridge, from which a tube goes to the printhead, there's a little buffer in between. So when this one runs out, it obviously gives you a warning that your ink is out, but it won't stop printing, because from the buffer you can continue to print. Now you can't print for days, obviously, because if you do that you run down the buffer, and if the buffer would be empty you'd be having air in your system. That would be a bad thing. But you have plenty of time to just go for your cartridge, open it up, insert it, and it would still be printing. Not so on the HP. On the HP, if your ink is out on either one of the 12 cartridges, you are in trouble because your print stops. If you're fast, it's okay, because if you're fast and just insert you're expecting it, you've got the cartridge lined up, you hear the beep from it's out of ink, you walk up there, you replace it, you say continue, you probably won't notice it. On most prints you will not notice it. If you have a completely even big area where there's a completely blue filling, for instance, then you might see it, but in most cases you won't. But you have to be there quick. If you wait too long, either your driver will give up trying to send data because it just thinks your printer is not responding, or it's dried so much that you'll get a difference, you get a band. So that's on ink size, so definitely a plus for the Canon. So how does that relate to prices? What I've done here is I've put in a price comparison for both. Cartridge content for the HP 130, Canon 300. Street price, again debatable, but I had to put in something, and you can put in your own numbers if you like and make a different comparison, but these are the street prices I came up with. Obviously the 300 is more expensive because it's 300. Per milliliter, that's always what you should look at. The HP is more expensive than a Canon. If that is a problem, it depends on how much prints you make. We'll come back to that later here. Then the print heads. Now obviously when you have one or two of these, so 2 of these, or 12 of these, or 6 of these, sorry, let me do that again. 2 of these or 6 of these, that makes a difference. It makes a difference in price as well, because Canon has made their printhead pretty expensive. The Canon printhead is €350. So if either one of those 6 colors in that head decides to stop, you need to pay €350 to get another one. You can replace it yourself, it's easy, it's done within 2 minutes. But it does cost money. It also costs money on the HP, but you only replace 2 colors instead of 6. So even if you would do the math 3 times, the Canon head is slightly more expensive. I've tried to put the printhead price in the comparison and make that a factor in the amount of prints you make. So the price per color is what you should look at, is here €29, and for Canon it's €58 per color, per printhead color. So how does that add up in prints? Well, I've made a variable here. So if I put in only one print here, obviously it doesn't make a lot of difference because you make only a little difference in print quality, in price per square meter. So this is just an estimate. It's not accurate. It depends on your print, obviously, but you can say that if you average in 10 milliliters in total for a square meter, you're pretty accurate. You could have a print with 2. You could have one with 20, but if you average it out, 10 I found to be a quite good average number of milliliters per square meter. There's debate about if the Canon is more efficient or the HP. Both claim they are, because I've seen actual presentations from both manufacturers telling me that they are themselves more efficient than Canon, or HP more efficient than Canon, Canon more efficient than HP. So I think they're about the same. I've got both of them here. I've had a Canon printer for a long time. I've had an HP printer for a very long time. They're both pretty good in their ink usage. Much better than Epson. We'll talk about that in a different video, but both of them beat the heck out of Epson when it comes to cost per square meter in ink. So that's the ink. Then of course you make a number of prints. So what I've done here, if you make, say, in the lifetime of your printer, make 5,000 square meters, which is a fair number, then you have a price difference which you would add up to. So you would be spending a multitude of your printer in ink, which is of course why large format printers are so cheap, because they are cheap. When I started out in this business, which is almost a century ago, printers used to be about 4, 5, 6 times more expensive, absolutely speaking, than what they are now. And they are now 4, 5, 6 times faster and about 4, 5, 6 times better. But they're also 4, 5, 6 times less expensive. The reason manufacturers have been able to do this is because of this. They make money on ink. They wouldn't be in this business of printing if they couldn't sell ink at all. Luckily for them, most people buy HP inks for HP printers and Canon ink for Canon printers. Not always, but in most cases. Not recommended in most cases, because you will have less problems. You might save money, but you'll spend money if you have problems due to inks not working right. So your ink price here is a big difference. Your printer price is not a big difference, but if you want to have the same capabilities, you'd have to add the spectrophotometer to the Canon, which would make the Canon more expensive. The printhead itself, a price, I've done a sort of math on how much printhead cost you would put in 1 square meter. That's a fair way of doing it. Then you would end up spending, again, twice as much on printheads with Canon than you would on HP. So the total price would be, for 5,000 prints, 25,000 for HP and 21,000. Now, no matter how you add these numbers up, the Canon will always be slightly less expensive, but it depends on how many prints you make. But there's always a benefit for the Canon when it comes to price. Without the spectrophotometer, see if you add the spectrophotometer and make 400 prints, they even out. You would just get a faster printer with Canon and a slightly easier way of making profiles with Canon, with HP, sorry. So my final verdict on these printers, do I have my preference for either one? Yes and no. I have my preference in speed, and then it's Canon. That's easy, because I need 2 printers of HP to do what I can do with 1 Canon printer of this particular model. But the ease of use is also a thing, and the ease of use of adding paper types to an HP and having them profiled without having to purchase any software and install different software, that is a benefit that I think will appeal to most people. If you have a company that will provide you profiles then you don't really need to worry about it, because if they say, well, we'll provide you the profiles for whatever media type you buy from us, which would be a good policy for any vendor, then you can just say, well, I want to use this paper, make me a profile on my printer. And if a supplier would do that, you would have the same quality. You would not be able to do it as quickly as you would with the HP, because there you can go from an unknown media to a profile media in less than 30 minutes, which is possible with the Canon, but you need to spend some more money, and you need to get familiar with the software a bit more and do a little more effort, from what I've seen, than on the HP. So quality wise and color, I wouldn't care. I can make prints on both and nobody would know the difference. Nobody would be able to tell which one was which. On sharpness, same thing. They're both very sharp. You will not need a sharper printer than either one of these. So it comes down to ease of use. There, of course, the Canon has the advantage of the ink buffers, where HP has the spectrophotometer. So it's really up to you. If I didn't have a printer at all, but I did have my color management stuff that I do have, I'm likely to buy a Canon now more than I am to buy an HP 3200, simply because of the speed. Everybody likes speed. But since that's not really fair, because most people don't have the software and hardware to make profiles, you would need to spend more money on the Canon to do the same thing that you can do standard in the HP. So it's really up to you. If you want to know more about this, or you have some questions or remarks on what I told you here, feel free to contact me. The easiest email address is info@colorplaza.nl. I'm Boudewijn Krijger, and I thank you for watching, and see you next time. Bye.